My fellow Americans, I am about to sign into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
President Lyndon Johnson speaking from the Oval Office 40 years ago today. The bill that he signed that night changed the face of America. It opened all public accommodations, hotels, restaurants, swimming pools to all Americans, regardless of race, color, religion, or national origin. The bill also ended legal discrimination in employment on the basis of race or sex and established the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to enforce the law. The signing ceremony represented a personal triumph for President Johnson.
Joining us now to talk more about that is NPR's Cokie Roberts. Good morning.
Good morning, Steve.
There was a previous president who tried to get a civil rights bill through, President Kennedy, and he failed.
Well, President Kennedy in June of 1963 went before the nation and called for a civil rights bill. Of course, it was at a time of tremendous unrest. There were demonstrations in the streets. There were bombings in churches. There were civil rights workers working around the South and sit-ins and all of that. And the March of August of 1963 on Washington was being planned. And so President Kennedy, with a good bit of pressure on him, did call for a civil rights bill, and it went absolutely nowhere in Congress. It got buried immediately until President Kennedy was assassinated. And then Lyndon Johnson became president, and 5 days after the assassination, he addressed a joint session of Congress, and he said that a civil rights bill was a necessity. Here's what he had to say.
I urge you again, as I did in 1957 and again in 1960, to enact a civil rights law so that we can move forward to eliminate from this nation every trace of discrimination and oppression that is based upon race or color.
So Johnson had the emotional effect of the Kennedy assassination working for him, but this is also a guy who was very shrewd in his dealings with Congress.
And he had a lot of hurdles in Congress. First, the House Rules Committee, which brings a bill to the floor, was threatening not to bring a bill to the floor. And finally, the bill did make it to the House floor, where there were hundreds of weakening amendments offered. But most of those were defeated, except one that turned out to be highly significant. Listen to this conversation that Lyndon Johnson had on the day the House passed the bill, February of 1964. These are the White House tapes that Lyndon Johnson recorded his phone conversations and often forgot he was recording them. He had this conversation with Jack Brooks, a Democrat from Texas.
All right, final vote 290 to 130 again.
Pretty good. That's pretty good.
And no crippling amendments at all. Got a sex amendment on women. But Pickle voted for us.
Now, Steve, I cannot tell you how significant that little off-the-hand throwing in, there was an amendment about women, turned out to be. It was an amendment put in by the chairman of the Rules Committee, Howard Smith, in order to kill the bill, because he thought his colleagues might be crazy enough to vote against discrimination on the basis of race, but certainly not on the basis of sex. And remember, help wanted signs at the time were white and colored, male and female. It was legal. And by trying to kill the bill, the word sex got into the final passage with the help of some women in Congress, and women were given equal employment opportunities. At the beginning of that summer of 1964, I graduated from college. It was legal to tell me, as everyone did, we don't hire women to do that. By the end of that summer, it was illegal.
So that got it through the House of Representatives.
And then there was the Senate to deal with, and there was a huge filibuster going on, led by Lyndon Johnson's old mentor, Dick Russell of Georgia. Johnson couldn't budge him. Finally, Everett Dirksen, the crusty Republican leader, said that he would bring the Republican votes necessary to close debate on the filibuster. President Johnson talked to Everett Dirksen about that, and it is classic Lyndon Johnson.
We don't want this to be a Democratic bill. We want it to be an American bill. And if these schools are out, if they're coming out at the end of this month, and if they're out and we haven't got a bill, we're in a hell of shape. We're going to be in trouble anyway.
Well, we're going to try.
I saw your exhibit to World Fair, and it said the land of Lincoln. Yes. So you're worthy of the land of Lincoln, and the man from Illinois is going to pass the bill, and I'll see that you get proper attention and credit.
Thanks.
Bye.
So it gets through the Senate, then it goes to President Johnson, who's the guy who wanted the bill in the first place, but there was one more hurdle to get through.
Because remember now, the civil rights workers had been killed in Mississippi at this point. There was tremendous unease, and Attorney General Robert Kennedy was afraid that if the bill was signed before 4th of July weekend, that there'd be violence over the weekend, and he recommended delay. President Johnson talked to Hubert Humphrey, the chief sponsor of the bill in the Senate, about whether they should delay signing, and here's that conversation.
Now, another thing, Bobby came in this morning and suggested we might not ought to sign that thing tonight, maybe we ought to wait till next week. I'm afraid to wait till next week because he said, well, it might have some trouble Saturday. Negroes putting off firecrackers and everything. I talked to Roy Wilkins, some of them. They say we ought to sign it as soon as it gets available. It ought to be on July the 4th, but go on and sign it as soon as it gets available. Another thing, I don't want the Republicans to think that I wanted to wait till they got out of town and then they put on a public relation trick with just me and you.
I agree. I think you ought to sign it either tonight or tomorrow.
Just as soon as it's available. I'm not showing any doubt or hesitancy.
No hesitancy at all. And if you have some people that ought to be invited into this ceremony, you may want to hold it up until tomorrow morning.
No, we want that night TV.
The night TV. Well, then, you could, whatever you think is best.
We're going to try to shoot 7 o'clock if the House gets this bill.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So he took the risk of violence over the July 4th weekend. Anything happen?
Nothing major happened, and the bill was signed in the Oval Office before a live broadcast out of the Oval Office with Lyndon Johnson having the triumph of the Civil Rights Bill.
We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty, yet millions are being deprived of those blessings, not because of their own failures, but because of the color of their skin. Our Constitution, foundation of our republic, forbids it. The principles of our freedom forbid it. Morality forbids it. And the law I will sign tonight forbids it.
Could anybody else but Lyndon Johnson have managed this bill to get it through Congress and to get it into law?
It would have been very difficult. The combination of the fact that he was a master at legislation and that he was from Texas. He was negotiating with a twang, not a Boston accent, and that made a big difference.
NPR's Cokie Roberts. Cokie, thanks.
Good to be with you.